Hey everybody, Thiago here. So I want to talk to you about developing an app, but this is not for developers, okay? I want to talk directly to the business people, all right? So maybe you are someone with an idea and you have no clue how to get started. Or maybe you work for a very big company and you have an idea, something that would help your company, but you want to educate yourself a little more on how this whole process works so you can sell the idea up the ladder, so to speak. Okay, so this is for you. Now, let's talk about money. You're either going to fall into two categories. One, you have no funds. If that's you, you have to be resourceful. Go to meetup.com, find events and meetings in your area. Okay, it's literally all over the world. Meetings in which they're talking about development, right? There are developers there, designers, and you go there, make some new friends, take them out for coffee, and explain your idea to them. Hopefully they will want to join your team, and then you offer equity, okay, instead of money. And the other option is you do have the funds, but you have no idea about the whole process, so you're a little scared of talking to developers because you don't know anything about it. Again, key things to know when you have an idea and you start talking to people, and I talk to people all the time regarding this, understand that ideas are cheap, okay? Just because you have an idea and maybe it's a great idea, understand that the execution of the idea is 99.9% of whether it works or it fails. So don't be afraid of talking to people. A lot of people don't want to discuss the idea with anyone without signing an NDA. They're afraid they're going to run with the idea and build it. And if your idea is so delicate that you cannot share a condensed version of it with anybody, maybe it's not a great idea, right? So you should be able to talk to people about it. Obviously, if you have certain things about the product that you're building that's very unique, keep them as a secret. Don't tell everybody about that until you sign something. But you should be able to bring people into your team and talk to developing companies about your idea without having to sign an initial NDA. And then if you like the company that you're working with, if you like the developer that you're working with, then you sign a contract, an NDA, etc. The other thing for you to know is the term MVP, minimal viable product. That means having the very least amount of functionalities that you want in order to go live. When you are ready to go and you have the funds and you have the developers, your first goal is to finish the MVP version of your product. It may not have all the bells and whistles that you want in the long term, but you have to figure out what functionalities I must have before going live. That's what we call MVP. If you're able to keep the constraints on the MVP, your likelihood of succeeding will only increase. All right, so I'm gonna give you a very quick crash course on development, also known as pretend like you know what you're talking about in front of the developers, okay? That's important, right? So when you go to talk to IT, they're gonna be impressed because you know these things here. So quick history, the old way of building an application. So I'm gonna give you an example based on an e-commerce website. They have functionalities such as adding something to the cart, processing your credit card, logging in, and then you have your images, the pages, the HTML. In the past, you see here there are two circles, okay? The green one is front end, red one is back end. So an application is basically divided into front end, which is what the user sees on the browser or on the phone. And then you have the back end, where the database lives, the server, and all that functionality that the user does not see. In the past, those two things were sort of merged together. The developers building this application, they would sort of share the same files, and it was all kind of, like we call it spaghetti code. It was all sort of together. The issue with that was it added technical debt. It's similar to financial debt, right? So you have all these issues, and instead of fixing it, you don't have time to fix it, you don't have the resources to fix it, so you push it for later. And then it keeps adding and adding and adding. The issue with technical debt is that eventually, just like finance, you have technical bankruptcy. So technical bankruptcy, and I see that happening with sometimes really large companies. They have applications that they built 10, 15 years ago, and that the application is making a lot of money, but technology has changed, and the way people are accessing the application has changed. Now people are using the phone or the tablet, not just desktop, but it has become too expensive now to retroactively fix all the bugs. And then it's just too expensive to fix, or the infrastructure is so kind of delicate and taped together that people are afraid of changing anything, and the whole thing would just collapse and break. It becomes like a black box. It's up and running, but every now and then breaks and we have no idea why. That's kind of what we call technical bankruptcy. And when that happens, you basically have to throw everything away and build from scratch. So you want to avoid that. And then a better way of building an application is by separating the front end from the back end. You see here in this diagram, the red and the green are separate. And in the middle, you have this thing we call API, which is a channel of communication between the front end and the back end, which this already is quite an improvement. Okay, most websites, web apps and applications out there are built this way today. Now, there's an issue with this. As you can see here in the red circle, all the backend functionalities, the add to cart, the process payment, login, it's all within one circle. It's what we call a single point of failure. So if this red circle is a server, and let's say that server breaks, everything on your application will break. The login is not going to work, the credit card processing is not going to work, your app is down. So it's not really a very sustainable approach. A better way, much better way, some people call serverless solution. Even though you are using servers, it's just a way of saying it. For example, on the green circle, you have your front-end stuff, your images, HTML, etc. You still have your API, which is that channel of communication between front-end and back-end, okay? But now the back-end is much more resilient. Instead of having one large red circle with all the functionalities inside, you have smaller red circles. Each circle represents a server, let's say. And each server is only responsible for that specific functionality, like processing payments or login. So if the server that is handling search breaks, it's not going to impact the payment processing, or it's not going to impact people trying to create an account or logging in. That's basically how they build Amazon.com. It is a much more reliable way of building an application. Now, other than the infrastructure, you need to think about languages. Which language you should use to develop your application. There is no true answer, but I think there's a lot of wrong answers. And also be aware when you're dealing with developers and companies, everybody tends to try to sell you on a language that they like. There are a few things that you need to know in order to make a decision that will work for you. But think about this, how easy it is to find good developers on that language, depending on where you live. If you live in San Francisco, or if you live in Houston, in New York, depending on the industries that you have in your city, you will have different type of developers in that area. So you should consider that when choosing a programming language. Another thing, what is the current adoption rate of the language in the market? Is it going up or is it going down? What is the cost of buying specific software for developers? Some programming languages have free tools, some do not. So think about that, especially if you're a startup, consider the long-term cost. Also, certain languages tend to have more expensive developers. Okay, so keep that in mind. So overall, think about the cost of maintaining that application. And last but not least, each programming language has a community around it. Do some research and try to see how vibrant the community is. How many updates are available, how many projects are currently being created using that language. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So there are a few resources that you can look at. One, there's this index, and I'm going to put the links over here. You can go and take a look at how well certain languages are doing, whether they're going up or down as far as usage. So as you can see here, Java is still going very strong, is one of the preferred languages in the corporate world, C, Python, etc. And you can see whether certain languages are going up or going down. So this is just one factor that you should consider. Another good factor is GitHub. So github.com is a website where people collaborate and create open source software. So you can go to GitHub and take a look at what are people writing new software with. If you go to this link over here, you can take a look at the top languages over time on GitHub. So as you can see, like JavaScript is the number one on GitHub. However, on this index over here, JavaScript is kind of lower. Right? You should think about that because this index over here takes a lot of consideration on job openings and many other sort of variables like that. Big corporations tend to use more, Java and C. But if you go to GitHub, this is more the startup stuff. You see that JavaScript is number one. So depending on what you're building, you should consider these two metrics to make the decision. So that's basically it. There's a lot more to it, but I think this will give you a very minimal understanding on the whole process, so you can kind of talk to developers and at least know where to start. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I would love to hear your feedback on the comments below. Thanks.